How does whiskey shape the world? Better yet, what exactly is whiskey? Are all bourbons whiskey? Are all whiskeys bourbon? And with knowing the answer to the above, can we solve world peace? Maybe. But on a serious note, what actually qualifies a bottle to be called a bourbon? Stick around to find out. It's the Cynple Whiskey Show.
Cynple Whiskey, Cyncere. Here to keep it 100, what's the ABV? Keep it simple. Cynple Whiskey, and be sweeter.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Cynple Whiskey Show. I'm Cyncere, and tonight we're talking all things whiskey. Can we really take such a complex topic and keep it simple? We'll see. You know, it is simple. Taking a second to hit the subscribe button before we get started. Let's dive right in. Many moons ago, when I pondered the idea of calling myself a bourbon guy, a seemingly simple question was posed to me. What's your favorite whiskey? Not what's your favorite bourbon, not what's your favorite scotch. So that actually got me thinking I may have been looking at this all wrong. I was completely oblivious to scotch, Irish whiskey. I was just all things bourbon. Now I still do lean towards bourbon, and I haven't quite popped the cork on any real scotches yet, and airplane bottles don't count. But this takes me back to my point, taking time to dive into what exactly whiskey is. It's been called liquid sunshine, but it's really just science, history, and a little bit of magic in a glass. At its core, whiskey is a distilled spirit made from grains such as barley, corn, rye, and wheat. It's aged in numerous types of barrels to get all that beautiful color, all that beautiful flavor, and the complexity. Think of it like this. Whiskey is bread's cooler, more rebellious cousin, made from the same grains, but throws a raging party after fermentation. So how does it go from grain to glass? First up, we've got mashing. Grains are mixed in hot water and then it turns the starches into sugar. Then it's fermentation time. That's where the yeast does its thing, turns the sugar into alcohol, basically a bubbling science experiment. Next, it's distilled to separate the alcohol from everything else. And think of it this way, it's like you're cleaning up after a wild party and only the good stuff stays. Finally, it's aged in barrels. And the part that blows my mind and palate, the whiskey actually pulls flavors from the wood like vanilla, caramel, and spice. Oh, and fun fact, in the US, up to 10% of the whiskey in each barrel evaporates while it's aging. They call it the angel share, and think of it as your whiskey's tithe offering given as a sacrifice to make sure that they reap more good whiskey. Let's dive into a few different types of whiskey. Bourbon, my favorite. Bourbon is America's native spirit with roots going back all the way to the 18th century. And to be legally called bourbon, it has to be made strictly in the US, and it also follows strict guidelines. It has to be at least 51% corn in the mash, aged in new charred oak barrels, and distilled to no more than 160 proof. While many people associate bourbon with Kentucky, it can technically be made anywhere in the US. Kentucky accounts for more than 95% of the production. Bourbons are typically rich, sweet, notes of caramel, vanilla, and oak. Some bourbons bring forward additional flavors like spice, dried fruits, or nuttier undertones, depending on the mash bill and the aging process it goes through. Some of the popular bottles are easy to find: Buffalo Trace for me, Elijah Craig Small Batch. Harder to find or unicorn bottles: Pappy Van Winkle, George T. Stagg. All right, up next, rye whiskey. Rye whiskey offers a spicier, drier counterpart to bourbon. To qualify as a rye whiskey in the US, it has to have at least 51% rye in the mash bill. The high rye content creates a bold and often sharp flavor profile, making rye whiskey a favorite for cocktails like the Manhattan or the Old Fashioned. Canadian whiskey is often referred to as rye whiskey, but has fewer requirements so the flavor can vary. Rye whiskey brings a unique bite with flavors of pepper, clove, baking spices. It's more herbal and zesty like bourbon and finishes with a crisp, dry edge. I tend to get more of a minty note or a spearminty note when I'm sipping most rye. Some of the popular bottles are easy to find: Sazerac Rye, Rittenhouse Rye. Some of the hard to find bottles are unicorns: Michter's 10-year rye, Thomas H. Handy Sazerac Rye. All right, Scotch whiskey. Hailing from Scotland, Scotch whiskey is divided into distinct categories like single malt, single grain, blended malt, and blended grain. Single malt Scotch must be made from 100% malted barley and produced at a single distillery. Scotch is aged for at least 3 years in oak barrels, often in used barrels from bourbon or sherry. Its production regions, Highlands, Lowlands, Islay, Bayside, and Campbelltown, each bring unique characteristics. Flavor-wise, Scotch is incredibly diverse. Speyside whiskeys are often fruity and light. Highland whiskeys offer a mix of floral, spicy, and rich profile. Popular bottles are the easy-to-find bottles: Glenfiddich 12, Macallan 12. Hard-to-find bottles are unicorns: Ardbeg 25, Glendronach 18. Fun fact, both Scotch and Canadian whiskeys spell whiskey without an E, following the traditional Scottish spelling, differentiating it from its Irish and American counterpart. All right, up next, Irish whiskey. Known as one of the smoothest styles of whiskey, Irish whiskey must be distilled and aged in Ireland, typically triple distilled for exceptional smoothness. Irish whiskey relies both on malted and unmalted barley, setting it apart from some of the other types, often less aggressive than Scotch or Bourbon, making it a great entry point for beginners. Irish whiskey leans on flavors of honey, light citrus, vanilla, sometimes nuttier notes, even toasty notes. It's also known for its lighter body and easy drinkability. Some of the popular bottles are more easy to find bottles: Jameson, Bushmills. Harder to find bottles: Redbreast 27, Middleton very rare. Simple fact, Irish whiskey was once the most popular spirit in the world during the 1800s, but declined due to wars, trade restriction, and prohibition in the US. It has since seen a massive resurgence. Last but not least, Canadian whiskey. Canadian whiskey is, as I mentioned earlier, often referred to rye whiskey in Canada, has a long history and is known for its lighter, smoother style. Unlike US rye whiskey, there's no requirement for Canadian whiskey to have a specific rye content, which means the flavor can vary widely. It must, however, be aged in oak barrels for a minimum of 3 years. Canadian whiskey often has a light, crisp, and clean flavor profile with notes of honey, vanilla, and caramel. Depending on the blend, you might also find hints of spice or fruit. Popular bottles: Crown Royal, Canadian Club, hard to find unicorns, lot number 40 cask strength, Alberta Premium cask strength. So we just scratched the surface on whiskey as a whole. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to dive deeper and discuss popular bottles, hard to find bottles like unicorn, subcategories like Tennessee whiskey, corn whiskey, and blend. We can also dive deeper into other countries and whiskey as well. Just let me know down in the comments below. So knowing what you know now about whiskey, how it's made, some of the variations, and even some of the legal progressions it's made over time, are we ready to solve world peace or win a Nobel Peace Prize with this information? Probably not. But if you're ready to at least dive deeper into whiskey and start snagging your own bottles, check out my video on starting a collection in 2025. Whether you're a bourbon fan, a Scotch snob, or just getting started, there's a bottle of whiskey out there with your name on it. And ultimately, the best whiskey is the one you enjoy drinking. So sip, explore, and don't be afraid to try something new. Here's to full glasses, great stories, and keeping it simple. Cheers.